In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create this procedural crystal rock material. And if you'd like to purchase this procedural material, you can get it with the links in the video description. So after we create the material, I'll show you how to join it together into this custom node group, and the node group has many different customizable settings to change the look of the material. So here's just a few variations, I'll throw them up on the screen, just a few different variations of some really cool rocks or crystal rocks that you can get with this node group. So I'll go over all the custom settings. So there's this scale value, so you can use this to change the size of the entire material. Then there's the rock color, so you can have it like black or maybe gray or brown. And there's also the rock scale, so that's just the texture of the rock. Then there is the rock detail, and then there's also a second detail level for the rock. And then there's also this distortion value. So you can kind of distort the rocks if you want to. And then there's also the roughness of the rock, so you can make it more shiny. And then there's also the rock bump strength. Then there's also the crystal scale, so this is just going to change the size of the crystal's texture. Then there's also the crystal metallic, so if you want to look a little bit more like gold or look more metal, you could turn up that metallic, you can see it's really shiny, or you can turn it down and you can see it's not quite as shiny. Then there's also the crystal roughness, so you can make it more rough or more shiny. And then there's some different colors, so using these colors you can really get some cool variations. You could make like a really bright color, like a bright blue. You could make like some red crystals. And so with these three colors, you can see the color 1 is going to be the main color, but then color 2 is going to be kind of like a secondary color, which is just on the top. So for example, if I make this red, but then take color 2 and make this more of like a yellow, you can see now there's kind of going to be red around the bottom of it, but then the top is going to be more yellow. I can do the same thing by making like this like a dark blue. So let's make color 1 a dark blue, and then color 2 is going to be like a light blue. So you can see now that most of it's darker, but kind of there's some spots on the top which are a bit lighter. And then there's also color 3, which is just another kind of color there. So you can see there's just little spots kind of on the crystal. And then we also have 3 different settings. So we have the hue, the saturation, the value. So if you just want to quickly change through all the hues, you can just change the hue of the crystal. You can also change the saturation, so less saturated or more saturated. And then you can also change the value to make it lighter and darker. Then we also have the crystal detail. So if I turn this value down, you can see the crystals are bigger and much more chunky. Or if I turn the crystal detail way up, you can see there's going to be a lot more detail and they have little kind of chunks and bits. Then there's also the crystal size. So this is just the size of all the crystals. So you can make the crystals really big if you want to. But then there's also a crystal height. So you can like turn the crystal height down. So you can see now the crystals are really small. They're not popping out as much, but they are very wide. Or I can make this the opposite. So I can have the crystals be really tiny, but I could turn up the height. So you can see now there's just a few crystals here and there, but they're popping out of the mesh more. And there's also the crystal bump strength. And then finally, there's the displacement strength. So you can use this to pop out the mesh more. And if you'd like to purchase this procedural material, you can get it with the links in the video description. And you can also check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack if you'd like to purchase all of my materials. And my Ultimate Material Pack comes with all of my materials, and they're all pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. So once you set up and install my Ultimate Material Pack as an asset library into Blender, you just open up the asset browser in any of your projects and just drag and drop the materials into your 3D scenes. You can also purchase any of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And to learn how to create more materials, you can check out my Blender Procedural Material Tutorial playlist. So real quick, I'll show you what I have set up in the 3D viewport if you want to set up the blend file the same way that I have. So what I did is went to the add menu and I added a mesh icosphere, and then right behind me on the add icosphere settings, I turned the subdivisions up to 5 so that it has a bit more geometry for the displacements to use. And then let's also hit Control 3. So Control 3 is going to give it a subdivision surface with 3 levels, and I'll turn the render and viewport up to 3. Now if this is making your scene too laggy, you could turn the viewport down and the render down if you want to, or just turn the viewport down. So the viewport will be smaller, but it'll still render with the higher resolution. And why I want to add a lot of resolution is so that the displacements have more geometry to pop out the mesh. So now I'm going to scale this object down, and I'll scale it down by a 0.35. So a 0.35, and then just apply the object scale. And what I'm going to do for this tutorial is actually turn the levels viewport to 1 in the view, and then have it render with 3. So that'll just kind of speed things up. And then let's also use the object context menu and shade the object smooth. So then I also added a camera, and I just pointed the camera at the objects. And if you select the camera and go to the object data settings, I turned the focal length up to 82 just to kind of zoom the camera in a bit so things look a bit more flat. And also on the output settings, I set the resolution to 1920 by 1920, so it's a square image. And then I also added a few different area lights, so I'll go into the rendered view. So you can see I added this area light right here. So if you go to the add menu, go to light, you can add area light, and I turn the power to 140, and I set the shape to disk. And then for the other area light, this one I scaled up a lot bigger, and this is kind of like a room light on the back. So I turn the power to 100 and also the shape to disk. So that way we have a main light here, and then we also have the other light there kind of on the back. Now I am also going to be doing some compositing at the end to add that cool glow effect, but let's just disable the compositing for now. So I'm going to click on the shading and I'll just disable the compositor in the viewport, but later in the video I'll show you how to do the compositing. Now I also went over here to the world properties and I added in this Machine Shop 02 HDRI from polyhaven.com. Link is in the description, and I downloaded the 1K HDR version. So once you download the HDRI, you can click on that yellow dot here next to color and choose environment texture, and then click on the open button and open up the HDRI. And then also let's go over here to the output properties, actually the render properties, and I'm going to open up the film tab and just check mark the transparent button so you can't see the HDRI in the background. And then also on the color management, I'm using the view transform of Filmic and the look to a very high contrast. So I'm in the shading workspace, so I'm just going to open up the shader editor right over here. So I have the 3D viewport right over here in the rendered view. Then I have the shader editor right over here. So I'll select the object, let's click on new, and I can just rename the material. And then I will also be using the Node Wrangler add-on, so you can click on edit, go to the preferences, go to the add-ons tab, and just search for Node, and just enable the Node Wrangler add-on, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. So what I'm first going to do is create the rock texture. So let's go to the add menu. We're going to search for a noise texture. Let's preview the noise texture, and I'm going to hit Control T, which is going to use the Node Wrangler add-on. So with the noise texture selected, hit Control T. It's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping, and I want to put the object into the vector, so the textures are using the object coordinates. Let's also box select these two nodes here and hit Control J to add a frame. And then if you select the frame and press F2 to add a label, I can just call this mapping. So this will be the mapping nodes for all the textures. So now let's change the noise settings. So I'll leave the scale at 5, and I'll turn the detail to 10, and I'll turn the roughness to 8.6. So now what I want to do is also search for a Voronoi texture, and we're going to put this right here after the noise. And for this one, on the Voronoi, I'm going to change this F1 to distance to edge. And what we actually want to do is use the color, so put the color into the vector of the Voronoi. And let's just preview the Voronoi. So this way the noise texture is going through the vector, so it's distorting the placement of the Voronoi. And then I'll change the scale to 10, and I'll turn the detail up to 10 as well, so that it's a bit more detailed. Now I want the noise texture to have less of an effect over the Voronoi, so we're going to search for a mix color and drop this in between both textures. And what we're going to do is mix between the noise, which is distorted, and the mapping, which isn't distorted, because the mapping here is just using the object coordinates. So let's take the mapping vector and put that into A, and then we can take the noise color and put that into B. Now in the mix type here, we can change this to the linear light. So now as I drag the factor, you can see as 0, it's just using the Voronoi, so there's like those little chunks. But then as I turn up the factor, it's using more and more of the noise. So I'm going to turn the factor to a 0.75. Not a 0.75, we want to use a 0.075. 0.075, so it's just distorted a little bit, and this can also be used in the custom node group. So now what I want to do is mix it into the principal shader. So let's put the distance into the normal, and I can preview the principal shader. So let's take the base color and make it darker so it looks more like rock. And you can see that there is that bump there, but it looks really weird, and there's like that dark patch. And that's because we need to convert the color data into normal data. So to do this, we want to search for a bump node and put this here. And the distance can go into the height value, and then the normal can go into the normal. So now you can see we get this really cool rock texture. And what I want to do is make it less strong, so I'm going to take the bump distance and turn it to a 0.05, just a 0.05, so it is less strong. And then let's also change the color. So I'm just going to make it this nice dark gray color, and I'm using a hex value of 282828 if you want to punch that in and use the same color I'm using. And then here on the roughness, I'm going to turn this to a 0.58. So it's a little bit more rough. So that is it for the rock. So I'm going to click and drag to box select the nodes, hit Control J to add them in a frame, select the frame and press F2 to add a label, and I can just call this rock. and they'll just kind of compress these nodes to make it a bit smaller. Let's drag this up here, and we'll drag the material output down here. So now right down here under the rock texture, we're going to create another group of textures, which is going to be that mask there for where the crystals are going to show up. So what I'm going to do is actually select the noise, the linear light, and the Voronoi, and I'll hit Control-Shift-D, so Control-Shift-D will duplicate the nodes but keep the wires plugged up, and I'll hit Alt-P to bring them out of the frame, and let's just preview the Voronoi. So we're going to use a very similar setup, but let's first change the settings. So I'm going to turn the noise scale to 3, and I'll turn the roughness back to a 0.5. Then here on the factor, I'm going to have it a little bit less distorted, so I'm going to go with a 0.04 instead. And then here on the Voronoi, let's change the scale to 6. I'll turn the detail just to 1, and I'll leave the other settings how they are. So now you can see where these light parts are. That is where the little crystals are going to pop out of. However, I want to add a color ramp just to control the colors. So I'll add a color ramp and drop it there. And I'll just drag the black tab over, because if I had this way down, there'd be kind of too many crystals. So you can see if I just drag the black tag a little bit, now you can see there's just going to be some crystal spots here and there. And then also later in the custom node group, I want to be able to control like the size and height of the crystals. So I'm going to search for a hue saturation value and drop it here, and then duplicate it and drop it here. So this way we have 2 hue saturation values, and the values are going to control the crystals. So you can see this one is going to make like the crystals brighter, and then also this one here kind of affects it as well. So we'll be using these 2 in the custom node group. So let's just box select these nodes, join them into a frame, and add a label. And I'm just going to call this crystal texture mask, or whatever you want to call it. And also you don't need to add them into frames, you don't need to organize them like this, but I like to do this just to keep things really organized so we can remember what everything does. So now what I want to do is also create the actual crystal material, because we don't actually have a crystal material, we just have a rock material. So to create the crystal material, I want to search for a color ramp and drop this here. Let's preview the color ramp. And what I want to do is take the Voronoi distance, and we're going to put that into the color ramp. That's going to be the base, just using this Voronoi, that's going to be the base for our crystal color. And now I can just kind of make these more contrasty by dragging the white tab over. So I'm going to drag it over to about here, and then I'll drag the black tab over to about here. So now after this color ramp, I want to add the custom colors. So we're going to add a mix color and drop it right here, and the color can go into the factor. So now I can make the 2 different colors. So I'm going to make them kind of like green colors. So I'll have like a green color, and then on color B, that's going to be kind of like a lighter green. So you can kind of see what this is doing. It's going to make kind of like that darker green, or just the main green color around it. But then here on the very tips of the crystal, it's going to be a lighter color. So adding that little bit of variation will make it look more interesting. So of course, we'll use whatever color you want, but if you want to punch in the same hex codes, here's the hex code for color A, and then here is the hex code for color B. Now what I also want to do is just mix in a little bit of noise to make it more noisy. So let's search for a noise texture, drop it here, and then I can take the same mapping vector and put that into the vector noise. Let's preview the noise, and I can change the settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to 20, and I'll turn the detail to 10, and then I'll turn the roughness up to a 0.7 so it's more detailed. So now what I want to do is make it more contrasted. So we're going to add a color ramp, and we're going to put this after the noise. And then I'm going to drag the black tab way over here, just like that, so that it's a lot more contrasted. So now what I want to do is mix it here with the mix. So I'm going to duplicate this mix and drop it here. And we're going to take this bottom color ramp, and we're going to put that into the factor. And then we're going to take this mix result, and we're going to put that into color A. So this way you can see we're just mixing together little bits of noise. So now you can change the color. So you could add like, a blue color, or make it like a bright green or a yellow. You can do whatever you want. But if you want to use the same color that I'm using this kind of greenish bluish color. And here's the hex value if you want to punch in the same hex code. Now I also want to add a hue saturation value and drop it here after the mix, and this way we'll just have a hue, a saturation, and a value that we can use to just customize the material so it's easier to use. So let's add another principled shader now, because we have the color but we don't actually have a shader for this. So we'll put the color into the base color and preview the principled shader, and I'm going to turn the metallic value to a 0.7 so it's more kind of shiny and it has that metallic look. And then I'll turn the roughness to a 0.08 so you can see it's really, really shiny now. Now what I also want to do is add some bump, because right now it just looks too kind of shiny and flat. It almost looks like marble. So what I'm going to do is search for the bump node so we can convert color data into bump data. And let's take this color and we'll put that into the height value, and then the bump normal can go into the normal. So this way you can see there's just little bits there which look really detailed, but I want to make it less strong. So I'll turn the distance to a 0.05 0.005. So you can see now we just have little bits of detail there on the surface. And then what I also want to do is duplicate the bump and drop it down here. And we'll put the normal into the normal, and we're going to add one more texture. So I'll select the noise texture, and I'll hit Control-Shift-D and drop it here. And we can put the factor into the height value, and then let's change this noise settings. So I'll turn the scale to 100, and I'll leave the detail at 10, and I'll turn the roughness to a 0.55. So now you can see that we just have another little layer of detail. And then what I want to do is take this bump and turn the value to a 0.001, so it's very subtle. But now if you kind of zoom in here, you can see there's just a little bit of bump there over the surface. So we can box select all of these nodes here, join them into a frame, add a label, and I can just call this crystal. Alright, so now I want to mix together the rock and the crystal. So to do this, we want to search for a mix shader so that we can mix two shaders together. So let's put the rock into the top one, and the crystal can go into the bottom one, and we'll preview the mix shader. So now we just have this factor which I can drag back and forth to use only the rock or only the crystal, but I just want the crystal to show up in little bits, and that's going to be where the mask is. So we're going to put this hue, saturation, value, color, we're going to put that into the factor. So now you can see that just some parts have the crystal, but you can see it's kind of faded away. So what I'm going to do is search for a color ramp and put this after the hue saturation value, drop this here. Now I could just adjust this color ramp to make it really contrasty by like dragging the white tab up, but what I actually want to do is keep this kind of that grayish color and kind of have that nice fade, because this we're going to be adding into the displacements to actually make it pop out of the mesh. So that's why I'm adding this second color ramp here, and then this one we'll use just to make the color really sharp. So I'll drag the white tab way over and just make it right about there, so now you can clearly see where the crystals are and where the rocks are. So now let's also add it into the displacement. So we need to add a displacement node to convert the color data into displacement data. And we'll put the displacement into the displacement of the material output, and then the hue saturation value, that can go into the height value. So now you can see it looks like it's popping out of the mesh, but the problem is that it's not actually. So if I look here on the side, there is a bump taking effect, but there's not actual displacement. And that's because we need to go to the material settings and go to the settings and go to surface. And on the displacement type, we want to change this to displacement and bump. So this way it's using the displacement. Now you can see that it's going way back into the mesh, and so what we could do is we could adjust the colors. So you can see if I adjust the colors here, like let's take the black color and like turn this up, you can see that's going to adjust it, but it's going to cause some problems because then this color won't really align up with the displacement. So what I'm going to do is take the mid-level and I'm going to turn it all the way to 0. So if I turn the mid-level to 0, now you can see that's aligning better with the object, but now it's way too strong, so I'll turn the scale here on the displacement just to a 0.2. So there we go, now we have these little chunks of crystals which are coming out of the rock. So that is it for the procedural material, so let's now join together into a node group. So I'm going to box select everything except the material output, and you can hit Control-G to join together into a node group. Let's hit Tab to go in and out of the node group, and I'll drag the node group here, and I can make it bigger, and I will copy the material name and paste it here into the node group. So let's hit the Tab key to go into the node group, and I'll hit the N key to open up the side panel, and if you go to the Group tab on the group sockets, we can add up all the custom values. And so we can add them here to the group input, which is right over here on this side. So the first value that I want to add is the scale to change the size of the entire material. So this mapping is plugged up to all the textures. So I can take the scale and put that into the extra socket. And then if I click on the scale, if I just make this a bit smaller, let's go down here and you can see the type here is set to vector, and that's going to have 3 different values for the X, Y, and Z axis. But I want to make this one value, so I'm going to change the type to float. So now what I need to do is turn the default value back to 1, and then if I hit Tab to go out of the node group, we want to turn the scale back to 1. Let's go back into the node group. So now I want to add some of the rock settings, so I'll drag the group input right up here above the rock, and let's put the color into the extra socket, and I'll call this rock color here on the group sockets. Now what I also want to do is control the rock scale, but I don't want it to affect the overall scale of the entire material. I just want to have a scale value for the rocks. So what I'm going to do is hold down the Shift key and right click and drag over these wires and then let go, and that is going to add a reroute here. And so this one is just plugging up to the rock. So now what I can do is search for a mapping, not a UV map, but a mapping node, and we'll put this here in this wire, and then what you can do if you want to is just select the reroute and hit Control-X to get rid of it. And I'll drag the mapping here into the mapping. So you can see this mapping is now just added to the rock textures. So now what we can do is take the scale and put that into the extra socket. We'll double click on this and rename it to rock scale because it's only going to affect the rock textures. And then also we want to change the type to float, so it is one single value. And then what we need to do is turn the default value back to 1. Let's hit tab to go out the node group, and we want to turn the rock scale back to 1. So now that I control just the scale of the rocks. So go back into the node group. Now while we were creating that, we might as well do that over here because we're going to need to do that for the crystals. So I will hold down the shift key and right click and drag to add a reroute there. Then what we can do is search for a mapping and put it behind the reroute, and that way they're all going to connect up. And then if you want to, you can select the reroute and hit Control X to get rid of it. Now let's just compress these down. So then this mapping is just connected to all the textures for the crystals. Let's go up here and continue with the rocks. So what I want to do is add both detail values. So we'll put the detail here into the extra socket and the detail from the Voronoi as well as the noise into the extra socket, but they are both going to be into the same exact socket. And that way this detail will control the detail values for both of them at once. And then what I'll do is just call this rock detail 1. Now I also want to take the roughness value and I want to put this into a new socket. And this one we're going to call rock detail 2 because it definitely adds more detail. Then I want to control the rock distortion, which is controlled by the linear light factor. So I'll put the factor into the extra socket, and then let's rename this to rock distortion. And then I want to control the roughness and the bump strength. So I'll drag the group input over here. We'll put the roughness into the extra socket, and we're going to take the strength from the bump into the extra socket. And let's just rename this to rock roughness. And this one I'll rename to rock bump strength. So now what I want to do is add the scale for the crystals. So this mapping here, the second mapping, is plugged up to just the crystal textures. So I'll put the scale into the extra socket. Let's double click on it to rename it, and I'm going to call it crystal scale. And then the type needs to be float. We need to turn the default value to 1. And then if we go out of the node group by hitting tab, we'll turn the scale to 1. So now that's just going to change the size of the crystal textures. So let's go back into the node group. Now let's also add the metallic value. So if I just look over here on the principled shader, we'll put the metallic into the extra socket. Let's also do the same thing for the roughness. So put the roughness into the extra socket. And then let's just scroll down here and rename these. So I'm going to call this crystal metallic, and this one here is going to be crystal roughness. Then I want to add all the colors, so let's drag this closer, and I'll put color A and color B, and then the other color B here into all of the extra sockets. And let's just rename these, and I'll rename this one to crystal color 1, crystal color 2, and crystal color 3. Then I also want to control the hue, the saturation, and the value. So on the hue, saturation, value, we're going to put the hue, the saturation, and the value into the extra sockets. And then we'll just rename these. So I'm going to copy the crystal and add it here. So paste that. So we have crystal hue, crystal saturation, and crystal value. Now the main texture for the crystals is in the crystal texture mask. It's this Voronoi. So let's just drag this back and drag the input right up here. And I want to take the detail value here, this detail value of the Voronoi, and I'm going to put that into the extra socket. And this is going to be called crystal detail. Then I want to control the size and the height of the crystals. So you can see this first one here is going to change the size of it, but then this one here is just going to change the height of it. So on the first hue saturation value, we'll put the value into the extra socket, and then let's rename this to crystal size. And then we'll take the second value, put that into the extra socket, and this one is going to be called crystal height. So now what I want to do is control the bump strength. So we'll drag this down here and we'll put the strength value into the extra socket. And then this bump we'll put in the same exact socket. So this way we can control both of them at once. And so this one I will call crystal bump strength. And then finally I want to control the displacement strength. So let's drag the group input way over here. And we're going to put the scale into the extra socket. And we'll rename that to displacement strength. So I can hit the N key to close the side panel. Let's drag the group input way over here. And then if I select the mapping, let's just drag the mapping over there, just like that. And maybe just drag this back, drag this up. So I can now hit the tab key to go outside the node group. Now we have this super customizable node group. Now before I finish this off, I do also want to add the compositing to add like some glare to make it look really cool. So if you click over here to go to the compositing workspace, you want to click on use nodes to use the compositing nodes. Now also I opened up this side panel here to have the 3D viewport so I can see the compositing in the viewport. So I'm going to go into the rendered viewport mode here. You can just split the window and change the window to the 3D view. And then if you scroll right over here to the rendered view, click on the drop down arrow on viewport shading and turn the compositor to always. So now what I want to do is I want to add a background. So I'm going to add an alpha over node, drop this here, and you can control shift select the alpha over to preview it. And I'm going to put this image onto the bottom, and then the top one is going to be fully black. And then the final thing that I want to do is just add a glare node. So put the glare node before the alpha over. The streaks we're going to change to bloom. The medium I'm going to change to high quality. And then what I can do is turn the strength up to maybe like a 2. I can also take the size and turn that down a bit to like a 0.2, so it's not quite as big. And then we can also change the tint. So you can make it white, or you can make it any custom color you want. I'm going to make it kind of like a greenish color like that, so that it kind of glows green. But of course, if you change the color, like if you use purple, you might want to use like a pinkish or red. If you use blue, you might want to do like a lighter blue. So just kind of adjust this to whatever you want to do. Also using kind of like a yellow glow looks pretty cool. So this way the crystals are green, but then the tint is yellow. That does look pretty cool. So I might do kind of a yellowish green. So we can go back here to the shading workspace. And if we scroll over here, click here on the drop down on the viewport shading, we'll turn this to always. So there is the finished material. So I'll just review the material. So we have the overall scale. Then we also have the rock color. We have like the rock scale. We have the detail levels for the rock and distortion values for the rock. We also have the roughness of the rock and the bump strength. Then we have just the crystal scale, so you can make really small crystals or big crystals. We have the metallic value, so you make it more metallic or less metallic. And then also the roughness of the crystals. And then we also have the crystal colors. So another really cool variation would be to make like a dark blue, and then maybe make this like kind of a lighter blue. So the lighter blue is kind of going to be on the top. And then also maybe choose like kind of an aqua color or just another light blue color. And then of course over here on the compositor, you could turn the tint also to like a blue color so that the colors are kind of matching. We'll go back to the shading. Then we have the hue, so you can just change the hue of the entire colors, the saturation, and also the value to make them lighter and darker. Then we have the crystal detail, so if I turn it down it's more chunky, or I can turn this up and then there's just a lot of detail. I can also just change the size of the crystals, then also the height of the crystals so you can make them pop out of the mesh more. And then we have the crystal bump strength, and then finally we have the displacement strength to pop out the mesh. And you can also purchase this procedural material on my Gumroad store and Patreon page with the links in the description, and that's a great way to help support this channel. And you can also purchase my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack if you'd like to purchase all of my materials. And to learn how to create more procedural materials, you can check out my procedural material tutorial playlist here on YouTube. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.